The power cut hit us like a thief in the night, plunging our little house into darkness, both literal and in our hearts. As I stood there, clutching a broken lantern, wondering how I'd keep my family from falling apart. My name's Ellen Harper, and I'm a single mom clawing my way through life in a rickety old house on the outskirts of Willow Creek, a sleepy little town tucked into the hills of upstate New York. It was a brutal December night when it happened. The wind roared like a freight train, rattling the windows while snow piled up outside like a wall, cutting us off from the world. The cold wasn't just outside. It seeped into the walls, into my bones, into every corner of that drafty house. I'd lit a candle earlier, but it barely flickered against the gloom. Then around 9 the light stuttered once, twice, and died completely, leaving me standing in the living room, my breath fogging in the air, my hands trembling as I tried to make sense of it all. "Mom, are we gonna freeze to death?" My 10-year-old daughter, Lily, poked her head out from a pile of blankets on the couch. Her brown eyes were wide, but her voice held that unshakable trust kids have, like I could snap my fingers and turn the heat back on. "We've got blankets, kiddo," I said, forcing a smile that felt more like a grimace. "I'll figure something out." But I wasn't so sure. The truth was, I was out of my depth, out of firewood, out of ideas, and worst of all, out of Jack. My son, 18 and full of fire, had stormed out 2 weeks ago after a blowout fight. I'd told him he couldn't skip school to find himself, and he'd thrown back that I was smothering him, that I didn't understand. The door slammed and that was it. He hadn't called, hadn't texted. Now with the storm raging, I didn't even know if he was alive. I shuffled to the closet, my socks sliding on the cold hardwood, and dug out my dad's old lantern. It was a beat-up thing, dented brass, chipped paint, a relic from a man who'd left me too soon. Dad died in a car wreck when Jack was 5, back when Lily was still in diapers, and this lantern had been my lifeline ever since. A flickering promise that I could weather anything. I struck a match, but it hissed out in the damp air. Another one sputtered and died too. Lily giggled from her blanket fortress. "You're worse at this than Dad ever was," she said, her voice cutting through the dark like a tiny bell. I chuckled despite myself, even as the memory of my husband, Tom, twisted in my chest. She didn't remember him much, just stories I'd told her, but Jack did. Maybe that's why he'd been pulling away, why his eyes had gone hard these past few years. Too many ghosts in this house, and I couldn't chase them out. I sank onto the floor, the lantern heavy in my lap, the storm screaming outside. The power wasn't coming back tonight, and neither was Jack. I pictured him out there, huddled in some alley or worse, and my throat tightened. I'd failed him, failed Lily, failed this whole crumbling idea of family. The darkness pressed in, and all I could do was sit there, clutching that broken light, praying for a miracle I didn't deserve. Morning crept in, gray and unforgiving, the storm still clawing at the house like it had a personal vendetta. Lily was sprawled on the couch, reading one of her dog-eared books by the weak beam of a flashlight, her blanket trailing behind her like a superhero's cape. I sat cross-legged on the floor, staring at the lantern as if it could whisper answers to me. My mind drifted back to brighter days. Days when this house wasn't so quiet, when Jack's laughter bounced off the walls and Tom's voice filled the gaps. I could still see them out front, Jack at 8, scrambling up a ladder with a tangle of Christmas lights while Tom steadied him, both of them grinning like they'd invented the holiday themselves. Lily was a toddler then, tugging at my apron strings, her chubby hands sticky with cookie dough. Those were the days I'd thought we'd keep forever. Then came the crash. Tom's truck skidded off an icy road one February night, and just like that he was gone. Jack was 5, old enough to feel the hole it left, and I was 30, too young to be a widow but too old to start over. I took up waitressing, patched the kids' clothes with thrift store thread, and kept us afloat. Jack was my little shadow back then, hauling firewood, making Lily giggle with his goofy faces. But puberty hit him like a storm of its own. He went quiet, then surly, and by high school, He was a stranger in flannel and ripped jeans. Every talk turned into a fight. "You don't get me, Mom," he'd growl and I'd snap back. "I'm trying to keep us together." The last fight was the worst, 2 weeks ago when he'd stormed out into the night. I shook off the memory and grabbed a screwdriver from the kitchen drawer, determined to fix the lantern if I couldn't fix us. Lily wandered over, dragging her blanket. "You're gonna break it worse," she said, smirking as I fumbled the tool and it clattered to the floor. "Keep talking and you're on dish duty forever." I shot back and her laugh, a bright bubbling sound, pulled me out of the fog for a moment. I needed that. But then I reached into the closet for a rag and found Jack's old denim jacket instead, stiff with cold. My fingers brushed something in the pocket. A crumpled bus schedule, Elmwood to Willow Creek, circled in red ink, dated a month ago. Elmwood was 30 miles away, a gritty little town with a garage and a diner and not much else. My stomach twisted. Had he been planning to leave for weeks? Was he working there, hiding from me? Or running for good? I didn't tell Lily. She didn't need to carry that weight, not yet. I kept tinkering with the lantern, unscrewing the base, my hands shaking as I tried to focus. The wind rattled the windows, a low moan that matched the ache in my chest. Jack was out there somewhere and I couldn't reach him. Not with a screwdriver, not with a phone that wouldn't ring. I'd pushed him too hard or not hard enough, and now the storm was swallowing us both. But giving up wasn't in me. I'd fix this damn lantern and maybe, just maybe, I'd find a way to fix us too. The second night was merciless. Snow entombed the driveway, turning my old station wagon into a ghost under a white veil, while the cold slipped through every crevice like a thief staking claim. Lily and I were buried under blankets, her flashlight dancing weakly as she murmured about brave knights and fire-breathing dragons. I'd abandoned the lantern. It sat on the coffee table, a cold, useless lump taunting me. Then a knock, sharp, urgent, pierced the storm's wail like a blade. My heart jolted. "Jack?" I lurched to the door, socks snagging on the floorboards, and flung it open into the icy wind. There he was, my son, drenched and shivering, his dark hair dripping, his breath fogging in bursts. But behind him stood a stranger, a rough-looking man gripping a toolbox, his face shadowed under a snow-crusted cap, eyes glinting in the dark. "Jack!" I rasped, relief drowned by a surge of dread. "Where've you been?" My gaze snapped to the man. "Who are you? What's this about?" My voice climbed, shrill with panic. Was he police? A debt collector Jack had tangled with? My hands clenched, ready to shove them both back into the storm if I had to. "Mom, stop, just let us in," Jack said, his voice raw but firm, his eyes meeting mine with a flicker of something I hadn't seen in years, pleading. I hesitated, then stepped back and they trudged inside, trailing slush across the rug. Lily sprang up, dropping her blanket. "Jack, you're back!" she cried, throwing herself at him. "Yeah, squirt," he said, tousling her hair with a faint smile. "But I wasn't thawing yet. You disappear for weeks and drag some guy here in the middle of a blizzard? Talk, Jack, now." The man set his toolbox down with a heavy clank and tipped his cap back. "Name's Harold. Own the auto shop in Elmwood. Your boy's been working for me." His voice grated like sandpaper, and he watched me like he knew something I didn't. "Working?" I barked, incredulous. "He's supposed to be in school, not messing around in some garage." Jack wiped water from his face, standing taller. "I wasn't messing around, Mom. I learned from Dad fixing that Chevy in the garage when I was a kid. Been at Harold's every night, weekends too. Nearly torched his place once. Guess I'm not cut out for pyrotechnics." He flashed a lopsided grin, and Lily's giggle cut the air, a brief spark in the tension. I ignored it, my pulse racing. "Why, Jack? Why run off and scare us half to death?" He swallowed, then locked eyes with me, his jaw tight. "The roof. I saw the leaks last summer, those damp patches you hid with towels. You said you'd handle it, but I knew we couldn't pay for it. So I saved up. Harold got me the stuff. Harold grunted, nodding. Kid's a damn mule. Worked himself to death. Said his family wasn't freezing on his watch. The words crashed over me, shattering my anger. Jack hadn't run. He'd fought for us in secret, while I'd painted him the villain. My knees buckled and tears burned my cheeks, hot and unstoppable. I'd been blind, and he'd been our light all along. Morning broke soft and still, the storm retreating to a murmur, leaving Willow Creek draped in quiet snow. We didn't wait. Harold dragged in a tarp, shingles, and a ladder from his truck, grumbling orders like an old general. Jack scaled the roof, his boots cracking through ice, moving with a sureness that echoed Tom fixing gutters years ago. Lily buzzed around me, passing nails and babbling about our cozy castle, rising from the mess. I handed up tools, my hands steadier now, my chest loosening with every thud of the hammer. By noon the roof was patched, rough around the edges but watertight, and the house felt like it could breathe again. That night we gathered in the living room. I pulled the lantern from the table, its dents glinting in the dimness, and gave it one last try. Harold watched, then let out a low chuckle. Tom's old junk, huh? We were thick as thieves growing up. Two punks in Elmwood, fishing and tinkering with scrap. Lost him when he moved here. Then Jack showed up at my shop, and damn if I didn't see Tom in him. Same grit, same heart. I paused, the match trembling. You knew him? Like a brother, Harold said, his voice softening. He'd be proud of this kid. The match flared, and the lantern bloomed with light, washing the room in gold. Jack dropped onto the couch beside me. Lily flopped across his lap, her head nestled against him. Harold sank into Tom's old armchair, the springs groaning under him. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It thrummed with life, with us. I stared at that glow and saw it. Us, battered, chipped but burning strong. Looking back, I see what family really is. Not the loud promises or perfect moments, but the quiet wars we wage for each other. Jack didn't leave me. He carried us in his messy, stubborn way. Resilience isn't always the shouting matches. It's a boy with grease-stained hands fixing a roof, a little girl's laugh pulling you through the dark. I thought I'd lost him, but he'd been our anchor all along. So here's my question. Have you ever misjudged someone's silence, only to find they were fighting for you? That's family, flawed, fierce, and forever shining.